Every evening at 5:30, she tied her apron the same way. 2 quick loops, a firm tug, and a knot tucked neatly to the side so it wouldn't catch on trays or snag on chairbacks. The fabric was soft from years of washing, the edges slightly frayed but clean. Always clean. She smoothed down her black slacks, adjusted the collar of her white blouse, and took a breath before stepping through the heavy oak doors of the grand veranda. Inside, the air smelled of rosemary, seared scallops, and expensive wine. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, buttery glow over linen-draped tables where people spoke in low, confident voices. About deals, about art, about places most would never see. She moved through it all like a shadow, quiet and efficient, never drawing attention unless someone raised a hand or caught her eye. To the guests, she was part of the scenery, like the velvet drapes or the polished silverware. Necessary but forgettable, she didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. Her real life began after her shift ended. She lived above a laundromat on the edge of the city, in a studio apartment so small she could touch both walls by stretching out her arms. The ceiling sloped slightly and the radiator clanked like an old man clearing his throat every time it kicked on. But in the corner, beneath a window that looked out onto fire escapes and flickering streetlights, sat her piano. It wasn't much to look at, secondhand, with a few chipped keys and a bench that squeaked when she shifted her weight. She'd bought it from a retired music teacher who was moving into a nursing home. "It still sings," the woman had said, running a wrinkled hand over the lid. "Just needs someone who listens." She'd paid $150, nearly a week's wages at the time, and hauled it up 3 flights of stairs with help from a neighbor and a lot of stubbornness. That piano was her sanctuary. While the city slept or partied or scrolled through screens, she sat at those keys and played. Not for anyone else. Just for herself. Sometimes Chopin, sometimes Debussy, sometimes melodies she made up on the spot. Tunes that carried the weight of long days. Missed calls from her sister. The ache of her mother's absence. Her fingers knew the music better than her mind did. They moved with a kind of quiet certainty, as if they remembered something her heart was still trying to say. She never thought anyone would hear her. And she never wanted them to. At the grand veranda, the weekend pianist was a fixture, always the same man in a tuxedo, playing smooth jazz and light classical between courses. He had silver hair, a practiced smile, and a way of making even the most complex passages sound effortless. The guests loved him. He was part of the experience, like the truffle oil or the sommelier's recommendations. But one Thursday in late October, everything changed. Rain poured down in thick sheets, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon. The usual pianist called in sick. "Flu," he said, and the manager paced near the host stand, muttering about cancellations and disappointed VIPs. One of the regulars that night was a film composer known for his moody scores and sharp tongue. He'd just wrapped a project in Europe and was back in town for a quiet dinner with 2 producers. They'd requested the corner booth, the one with the best acoustics and the least foot traffic. By 9, the dining room had thinned out, but the composer lingered, swirling ice in his glass of bourbon, staring out at the rain-streaked windows. The manager, desperate, turned to the staff. "Does anyone know how to play? Even a little? Just to fill the silence for an hour?" A few servers exchanged glances. One shrugged. Another shook her head. She hesitated. She hadn't played in front of anyone since high school, since the recital where she'd frozen mid-piece and walked off stage, cheeks burning to the sound of awkward coughs. That memory still lived in her bones, but the silence in the room felt heavier than usual. And the composer looked tired, not bored, not impatient. Just weary, like someone carrying a weight no one else could see. Before she could second-guess herself, she said, "I can try." The manager blinked. "You?" She nodded, already untying her apron. "Just don't mess up," he said, half joking, half panicked. She walked to the piano slowly, heart thudding. The instrument was grand, real ebony gleaming under the lights, nothing like her upright at home. She sat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands over the keys. For a moment she thought she might bolt. Then she closed her eyes and played. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't showy. She chose a Chopin nocturne, one she'd practiced 1,000 times in her apartment late at night when the world felt too loud. Her fingers found their place and the music spilled out like a sigh, soft, honest, full of spaces between. The notes were emotion-lived. The clink of glasses stopped. A fork hovered mid-air. Even the kitchen seemed to quiet down. The composer set his glass down. He didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. She played through the whole piece, then without thinking slipped into something else. A short, original composition she'd written after her mother passed. It had no name, just a melody that rose and fell like breath, like grief that had learned to walk again. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was the composer. Slow, deliberate, respectful. That broke the spell. Others joined in. Not the polite golf clap of obligation, but real applause, warm and surprised. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. A man whispered, "Who is she?" She stood quickly, cheeks warm, and gave a small nod before hurrying back toward the kitchen. But the manager caught her arm. "You're playing this weekend," he said, eyes wide. "No, every weekend. Starting now." She shook her head. "I'm a waitress, not a performer." "You're both," he insisted. "And tonight you saved this place." She didn't agree right away. But when she got home that night, soaked from the rain and trembling with adrenaline, she sat at her old piano and played the same pieces again. This time, though, something felt different. Not fear, not pride, just possibility. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. A guest had posted a short clip online, just 45 seconds of her playing, filmed from a table near the back. The caption read, "Waitress at the Grand Veranda just destroyed Chopin like it was nothing." No one was ready. By noon, it had 12,000 views. By evening, local news outlets were calling. She ignored most of it. But that Friday, she returned to work. And when the manager asked if she'd play that night, she said yes. On one condition, she'd still take tables. She wouldn't stop being who she was just because someone finally noticed her. That night, the restaurant was packed. Not just with regulars, but with curious newcomers, music students, even a few reporters. She served appetizers, refilled water glasses, and cracked jokes with longtime customers like nothing had changed. Then at 8 o'clock, she walked to the piano, sat down, and played. This time she wasn't nervous, because she realized something. She wasn't playing for them. She was playing for the girl who used to practice in a school hallway after everyone left. For the woman who cried into her hands after her mother's funeral. For the quiet hours in a tiny apartment where music was the only thing that made sense. And if others happened to hear it, well, that was just a bonus. By the end of the night, a man in a tailored coat approached her as she wiped down the bar. "I'm with a record label," he said, handing her a card. "Call me. You've got something rare." She took the card, thanked him, and tucked it into her apron pocket, where it stayed untouched. For days. Because fame wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to keep playing, on her terms, in her time, with no strings attached. But the world had already started paying attention, and once people hear something real, they don't forget it. Not easily. Not ever. Weekends at the Grand Veranda had always been busy, but now they were something else entirely. Reservations filled up weeks in advance, not just for the food, though the chef hadn't changed a single recipe, but for the woman who played piano between courses. People arrived early, ordered drinks they didn't really want, and sat facing the grand piano like it was a stage at Carnegie Hall. Some brought notebooks. Others recorded short clips on their phones, careful not to be obvious, though. Everyone knew what they were doing. She still wore her apron. Still took orders. Still refilled coffee and cleared plates with the same quiet efficiency. But now when she walked past a table, heads turned. Conversations dipped. Guests leaned in and whispered, "That's her." It unsettled her at first, the sudden weight of being seen, but she refused to let it change how she moved through her shift. If anything, she worked harder, as if proving she hadn't forgotten who she was. The piano slot was only supposed to be for an hour, but it always stretched longer. No one wanted her to stop. And truthfully, once her fingers touched the keys, she forgot about time too. She played pieces she'd loved since childhood, Bach's gentle preludes, Rachmaninoff's stormy interludes, but also her own compositions, the ones born from sleepless nights and bus rides home in the rain. They had no titles, just feelings, longing, relief, the quiet joy of a perfect cup of tea at 3 a.m. One Saturday, the film composer returned. He didn't make a show of it. Just sat at his usual corner booth, ordered the same bourbon, and listened. After her set, he waited until the crowd thinned, then approached her near the service station where she was stacking clean napkins. "You've got something most trained musicians spend lifetimes chasing," he said, voice low. "Emotional honesty. You're not showing off. You're telling the truth." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and thanked him. He handed her a small card, thick paper, embossed lettering. "If you ever want to record, call me. No pressure. Just don't let this stay hidden in a restaurant forever." She tucked the card into her pocket, same as the record label one. Still didn't call anyone. But that night, back in her apartment, she played longer than usual. Not for an audience, not even for herself. It felt more like a conversation, with the past, with the future, with the version of her who once believed talent had to be polished and perfect to be worthy. Word kept spreading. A classical music blog wrote a glowing piece titled, "The Waitress Who Plays Like She's Breathing." A jazz radio station invited her for a live segment. She declined, politely but firmly. "I'm not ready," she told the producer. And it was true. The idea of performing under bright lights with cameras and scripts and expectations made her stomach twist. Still, she couldn't ignore everything. When a local charity for music education reached out, asking if she'd consider playing at their annual fundraiser, she said yes. Not because it was glamorous, but because she remembered what it was like to borrow sheet music from the library, to practice on broken keyboards in schoolrooms that smelled of chalk and dust. She knew what it meant to love music when you had nothing else. The event was held in a modest community hall not far from where she grew up. Folding chairs, paper programs, a potluck table in the back. No chandeliers, no wine lists. Just people who believed music mattered, even if it didn't pay the bills. She played for 20 minutes, simple pieces, nothing flashy. But when she finished, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a too-big sweater and holding a recorder like it was treasure, ran up to her and said, "I want to play like you someday." That moment stayed with her longer than any standing ovation. Back at the grand veranda, things grew more complicated. Regulars who used to greet her with a nod now asked for selfies. Some left extravagant tips with notes like, "Quit your day, job," or "You belong on a real stage." She appreciated the kindness, but it missed the point. Serving wasn't just a job to her, it was part of who she was. The rhythm of it, the human connection, the way a well-timed refill or a knowing smile could turn someone's whole evening around. That mattered as much as the music. But not everyone understood. One evening, a woman in a sequined dress snapped her fingers twice to get her attention. "Honey, are you playing tonight? Or are you just here to serve?" The question stung, not because it was rude, she'd heard worse, but because it reduced her to one thing or the other. As if a person couldn't be both grounded and gifted. As if waiting tables made her less worthy of admiration, or playing piano made her too good for the apron. She forced a smile. "I'll be playing at 8, and I'll still bring your dessert." Later, in the staff break room, another server found her staring into her coffee. "Don't let them get to you," he said, handing her a cookie from the shared tin. "They pay to eat here, not to decide who you are." She laughed softly. "Thanks." Still, the tension grew. Some longtime guests began to complain. "It's not the same," one man grumbled to the manager. "Used to come for the food and the quiet. Now it's like a concert with table service." The manager, caught between profit and principle, started scheduling her only on Friday and Saturday nights, hoping to balance the old crowd with the new. She didn't argue. She just showed up, did her work, and played when asked. Then came the night everything shifted again. It was a Thursday, normally a quiet night, when a famous actress walked in unannounced. She wasn't in town for a premiere or a talk show, just visiting a friend. But when she saw who was behind the piano during the pre-dinner lull, her eyes lit up. She'd seen the viral clip months ago and had been meaning to come ever since. She stayed for 3 hours, ordered nothing but sparkling water. And when the last note faded, she stood, walked over and hugged her, right there in the middle of the dining room. "I've heard 1,000 pianists," the actress said, voice thick with emotion. "But you made me feel something I haven't felt in years. The moment was captured, of course, posted within minutes. By morning, her name, though she rarely gave it, was trending in local circles. Not as a celebrity, but as a mystery, the quiet woman with calloused hands and a gift that didn't need a spotlight to shine. Offers poured in faster now. A luxury watch brand wanted her in an ad. Elegance and simplicity, they called it. A streaming service asked if she'd score a short film. A university offered a guest residency, complete with housing and a studio. She read every email, listened to every voicemail, then filed them away. Because beneath the excitement, a quiet fear had taken root. What if she lost herself in all this attention? What if the music, the one pure thing she'd kept safe for so long, became just another product to sell? One rainy afternoon, she skipped her usual bus route and walked instead, hood pulled low, hands in her pockets. She passed street musicians, kids on skateboards, old men feeding pigeons. No one recognized her. No one expected anything. And in that anonymity, she felt a strange kind of peace. She stopped at a small park, sat on a wet bench, and watched a boy try to fly a kite in the drizzle. He kept running, stumbling, laughing when it crashed. Didn't care that it wasn't working perfectly, just loved the trying. That's when it hit her. She didn't have to choose between the apron and the piano. She didn't have to become someone else to be worthy of being heard. The music wasn't about perfection. It never had been. It was about showing up, messy, tired, hopeful, and offering something real. That night she made a decision. She'd keep playing at the grand veranda, but only on her terms. No more pressure to perform extra sets. No interviews unless they felt right. And she'd start saying yes to the things that mattered. Not the flashy ones, but the ones that kept music alive in places it was often forgotten. The next week, she called the charity organizer back. "I'd like to do more than just play," she said. "What if I taught a few lessons too?" The woman on the other end nearly cried, and so, slowly, quietly, she began to build a new rhythm, one that honored both sides of her life. She still tied her apron at 5:30 p.m. Still served the rich and the restless. But now when she sat at the piano, she didn't just play for them. She played for the girl in the too big sweater, for the boy with the soggy kite, for everyone who'd ever been told they weren't enough, unless they were louder, shinier, more. And in those notes, simple and true, she found something even rarer than fame. She found freedom. Fame, it turned out, wasn't a single bright spotlight. It was 1,000 little eyes, all watching, all expecting something. At first, the attention felt like a warm blanket. People smiling when she walked in. Strangers saying her music helped them through a hard week. A local paper calling her the soul of the city. But soon the warmth turned heavy. Every move she made seemed to ripple outward in ways she couldn't control. The Grand Veranda's owner, thrilled by the surge in reservations, started printing her photo on the back of menus. "The waitress who wows the elite," the caption read. She winced the first time she saw it. It sounded like a carnival act, not a person. She asked him to take it down. He laughed it off. "It's marketing, sweetheart. People love the story." But it wasn't her story, not the way he told it. She wasn't trying to wow anyone. She was just living, working, playing when the moment felt right. Yet the more people talked about her, the more they reshaped her into something she didn't recognize. The humble genius, the overnight sensation, the rags to riches dream. None of it fit. Her life hadn't been rags. It had been quiet, steady, full of small dignities most people never saw. And now, those dignities were being sold as part of a package. Regulars who once barely looked up from their wine now leaned in with questions. "Where'd you study? Did you always know you were this good? Are you going to quit and go on tour?" She answered politely, but inside she bristled. It wasn't curiosity, it was ownership. As if her talent gave them the right to dissect her past, predict her future, claim a piece of her journey. Not everyone was kind. Whispers started at the bar. She must have trained at Juilliard and is just pretending to be a waitress for the vibe. Probably using a fake name. This whole thing is staged, someone's managing her. She overheard it while refilling water glasses, her back turned, tray steady in hand. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they erased her truth. Every blister on her fingers, every late night practicing on a piano that wheezed when the humidity rose, none of that mattered if people assumed it was all a performance. Then came the offers that felt less like opportunities and more like traps. A talent agent showed up unannounced one evening, dressed in a suit so sharp it looked painful. He waited until her set ended, then cornered her near the coat check. "You're wasting your gift here," he said, voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I can get you on late-night TV, a record deal with global distribution, maybe even a residency in Vegas. You'd never have to serve another plate of pasta again." She thanked him, but said no. He frowned. "Why not? Don't you want more?" "More of what?" she asked quietly. "I already have what I need." He didn't understand. And that was the problem. Even well-meaning people pushed her toward paths she didn't want to walk. A journalist from a major magazine spent 2 hours interviewing her, only to write a piece that painted her as discovered, as if she'd been lost until someone with power noticed her. She read it once and never looked at it again. At home, things changed too. Her landlord, a quiet man who usually left her alone, knocked on her door one afternoon. "Heard you're famous now," he said, not unkindly. "Just wanted to let you know I'm raising the rent next month." Market rates, you understand. She did understand, and she paid it without argument. But it hurt, not because of the money, though that was tight, but because even her sanctuary wasn't safe from the ripple of attention. Old friends grew distant. One stopped returning calls. Another joked, "Guess I should have asked for your autograph back when we were sharing fries at the diner." It wasn't malice, just awkwardness. The unspoken question hanging between them. "Are you still one of us?" She missed the simplicity of being unseen. Yet amid the noise, small moments kept her grounded. One Tuesday, during a rare quiet lunch shift, an elderly man sat alone by the window. He didn't order wine or steak, just a cup of tea and a slice of rye toast. When she played a short piece during the lull, he closed his eyes and smiled like he was remembering something precious. Afterward, he handed her a folded napkin. On it, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "My wife used to play this. Thank you for bringing her back to me for a minute." She kept that napkin in her apron pocket for weeks. Another time, a teenage girl came in with her parents, eyes wide. "My piano teacher showed us your video," she whispered. "She said if I practice every day, maybe I can play like you someday." "No," she replied gently. "Play like you. That's the only way it matters." The girl blinked, then nodded, as if something clicked. Those were the moments that reminded her why she played it all. Not for fame, not for validation, but for the quiet connections that words couldn't carry. Still, the pressure mounted. Record labels kept calling. One offered an advance so large it could have paid off her student loans, fixed her piano, and bought a new apartment, all in one go. They promised creative control, no gimmicks, just her music, pure and unfiltered. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. She met with them in a sleek downtown office, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. They played her a mock-up of an album cover, her in soft focus, hands on piano keys, no apron in sight. "We want to highlight the artistry," the producer said, "not the service industry angle." She left the meeting feeling hollow, because the apron was part of her artistry, the long shifts, the tired feet, the way she learned to read people's moods by the way they stirred their coffee. That all shaped the music she made. To strip that away wasn't refinement, it was erasure. That night she didn't play at all. Just sat on her fire escape listening to the city breathe, the hum of traffic, a dog barking 3 blocks away, the distant laugh of neighbors on a rooftop. Real life. Unscripted. Unpolished. She thought about her mother, who'd worked double shifts at a hospital for 20 years, and still found time to hum lullabies while folding laundry. "Work doesn't make you less," she used to say. "It makes you real." Those words echoed now, louder than any applause. A few days later, the film composer called again. Not to pitch anything, just to check in. "I heard you're getting pulled in 10 directions," he said. "Don't let them turn your gift into a product. The world has enough of those. What it needs is more truth." She thanked him, voice thick. And then the offer she couldn't ignore arrived. Not from a label, not from a brand, but from a community center in a neighborhood where music programs had been cut for years. They'd seen her play at the charity event and wanted to know, would she consider teaching a weekly class? They had an old upright piano, a room with peeling paint, and a dozen kids who showed up every week just to be somewhere safe. She said yes before they finished the sentence. The first class was chaos. Kids banging on keys, arguing over who got to play first, one boy trying to balance a pencil on his nose while pretending to conduct. She didn't scold them. She just sat down, played a simple melody, and asked, "Who wants to learn this?" Hands shot up. That night, exhausted but smiling, she realized something. She didn't have to choose between serving and creating. Between being seen and staying true, she could build a life that held both, if she defined it on her own terms. So she made a list. She'd keep her job at the Grand Veranda, but only 3 nights a week. She'd play piano there when it felt right, not because someone demanded it. She'd teach at the community center every Saturday morning, and if she ever recorded music, it would be with people who respected her whole story, not just the parts that sold. When the big label called again, she finally answered, "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I'm not looking to become a star. I just want to keep playing and maybe help others find their own music too." There was a pause. Then surprisingly, the producer said, "You know what? That's refreshing. If you ever change your mind, we're here. But if not, I hope you keep doing exactly what you're doing." She hung up feeling lighter than she had in months. The world kept spinning. People kept talking. But she stopped trying to manage their expectations. Instead, she focused on what she could control. Showing up, being kind, playing with honesty. And slowly, the noise began to fade, not because people lost interest, but because she stopped feeding the version of herself they'd invented. She was still the woman who tied her apron at 5:30 p.m. still, the one who wiped down tables and remembered how her regulars liked their coffee. But now, when she sat at the piano, she played not for the rich and famous, not for the cameras, not even for the dream of something bigger. She played for the truth, and that, it turned out, was enough. The weight of a single decision can feel heavier than a whole year of ordinary days. And for weeks, that weight sat on her chest like a stone, quiet, constant, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about who she wanted to be, what kind of life she was willing to build, and whether she could trust herself enough to walk away from something that looked like a dream, but didn't feel like home. The offer from the major label hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown more tempting. They'd revised their proposal, full creative control, no image consultants, no forced interviews. They'd even agreed to keep her teaching schedule intact. "We're not asking you to disappear," the producer had said over coffee one rainy afternoon. "We're asking you to share your gift with more people. Isn't that what art is for?" She'd nodded because part of her knew he was right. Music wasn't meant to stay locked in a restaurant or a tiny apartment. It was meant to travel, to touch strangers in ways words never could. But another part of her, the part that still woke up with sore feet from standing all shift, the part that found peace in folding napkins just so, worried that stepping into the spotlight would cost her the very things that made her music honest. The pressure didn't just come from outside. It came from within. She started second-guessing everything. Was she being selfish by saying no? Was she wasting a chance most musicians would kill for? Worse, she began to doubt her own playing. During sets at the Grand Veranda, she'd catch herself wondering, are they clapping because they feel it? Or because they think they're supposed to? The moment that question entered her mind, the music changed. It became careful, polished, safe. And that was the opposite of everything she'd ever loved about it. One night, after a particularly stiff performance, she walked home in silence, rain soaking through her coat. She didn't go straight upstairs. Instead, she sat on the wet steps of the laundromat, watching steam rise from the vents below. A street musician played a worn-out saxophone under a bus stop shelter, notes curling into the damp air like smoke. No one was listening, just a few passers-by glancing over, but he played like it was the most important thing in the world. She stayed until the song ended. Then she went home, sat at her piano and played for the first time in days, not for an audience, not for a future album, not even for herself, just for the sake of sound. And slowly the tightness in her chest began to loosen. That's when she knew what she had to do. She needed space. Not from music, but from the noise around it. So she took a week off, something she hadn't done in years. She told the restaurant she needed personal time. She canceled her teaching class with a substitute, and she disappeared into the city, not as the pianist, not as the waitress, just as a person walking, listening, breathing. She visited places she'd never had time for, a free concert in a public library, a mural-covered alley where kids practiced breakdancing, a tiny bookstore that hosted poetry readings on Tuesday nights. She sat in the back, unnoticed, and watched how people connected through art that wasn't polished, wasn't perfect, but was deeply human. One afternoon, she found herself at a subway station where a young woman played violin near the turnstiles. Her case was open, filled with loose change and a few crumpled bills. She played a folk tune with raw, trembling emotion, slightly off-key in places, but full of heart. A man in a business suit stopped, dropped in a 20 and stood there for 3 full songs before hurrying off. No photo, no post, just a moment of shared feeling. That's what she missed. That's what she was afraid of losing. By the end of the week, she felt clearer than she had in months. She didn't need to reject the world or hide from it. She just needed to protect the core of why she played in the first place. Because it was her way of being honest in a world that often rewarded performance over truth. She called the label back. "I've thought about it," she said, "and I'm not ready for a world tour. I'm not ready to be on magazine covers or red carpets. But I would like to record an album, on my terms, small studio, no deadlines. And I keep my other life, the restaurant, the teaching, all of it." There was a long pause. Then the producer said, "You know, most people would kill for this chance and never look back. But I respect that you're not most people. Let's talk details." It wasn't a no. It wasn't a yes to everything. It was a boundary, and for the first time she felt proud of setting it. Back at the grand veranda, things had shifted again. The owner, sensing her growing distance, tried a new tactic: flattery. "You're the heart of this place now," he said during a staff meeting. "We're building a whole campaign around you." She didn't argue. She just handed in her updated availability. 3 nights a week, piano only on Saturdays. No more last-minute requests. No more photo ops. He frowned but didn't push. Business was still booming, and he knew better than to lose her completely. At the community center, the kids didn't care about record deals or viral fame. They cared that she showed up, that she laughed when someone hit a wrong note, that she let them compose their own silly songs about pizza and skateboards and annoying little brothers. One Saturday, a shy girl who'd barely spoken all month played a short piece she'd written. It was simple, full of mistakes, but played with such concentration that the whole room fell silent. When she finished, everyone clapped, not out of pity but respect. The girl beamed. That night, sitting on her fire escape with a cup of tea, she realized something. She didn't need to choose between 2 lives. She could weave them together, stitch by stitch, into something that felt like her. The album began slowly. Just her, a small studio downtown, and a sound engineer who'd worked with jazz legends and indie poets alike. No pressure. No expectations. They recorded in the early mornings before the city woke up, when the only sounds were distant sirens and the hum of the fridge. She played old pieces, new ones, even a reworked version of the melody she'd played that first rainy night at the restaurant. When it came time to name it, she didn't overthink it. She called it Apron Strings and Ivory Keys. Not clever, not flashy, just true. As the sessions wrapped, the label sent over mock-ups for the cover. One showed her in dramatic lighting, eyes closed, hands hovering over the keys. Another had a blurred background of a fancy restaurant. She shook her head. "Can we just use a photo of my actual piano? The one in my apartment? With the chipped keys and the sheet music piled on top?" They agreed. And when she saw the final design, a simple shot of her upright, sunlight through the window, an apron draped over the bench, she almost cried. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Still, doubts crept in. What if people expected something grand and got something quiet? What if they called it underwhelming? What if she'd made the wrong choice? Then she remembered the little girl at the community center, playing her imperfect song with pride. Perfection wasn't the point. Showing up was. Her first public concert wasn't in a theater or a club. It was in a converted warehouse on the edge of the arts district, a space used for poetry slams, experimental dance, and local band rehearsals. She offered free admission. No tickets, no VIP section, just open doors and folding chairs. Half the audience were regulars from the restaurant, some in tuxedos, others in jeans. The other half were students, neighbors, strangers who'd heard her music online and wanted to see the person behind it. No one filmed. No one shouted requests. They just listened. She played for an hour. No encore, no speech. When the last note faded, she closed the piano lid, smiled, and walked off stage. Not toward a green room or a waiting car, but to the back of the space, where a few kids from the community center were setting up a table with homemade cookies. One of them handed her a plate. "You were amazing," he said, grinning. She ruffled his hair. "So were you, setting this up." Later, as people milled about, chatting and sipping donated coffee, the film composer approached. "You didn't play for fame," he said quietly. "You played for belonging." That's rare. She didn't have an answer. She just nodded because, in the end, that's all she'd ever wanted. Not to be famous, not to be perfect, but to belong to a life that felt real. And now, finally, she did. The morning after the warehouse concert, she woke up to silence, not the kind that felt empty, but the kind that felt earned. No buzzing phone, no urgent emails, no strangers sliding into her messages with big ideas and bigger expectations. Just the familiar creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of the laundromat's dryers below, and the soft gray light of early autumn slipping through her window. She made coffee, wrapped herself in a worn-out sweater, and sat at her piano. Not to practice, not to prepare, just to play. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like coming home. The album had been released a week earlier, quietly, without fanfare. No billboards, no late-night TV appearances. Just a simple digital drop and a few vinyl copies sold at the community center and a couple of local record shops. The critics surprisingly loved it. Not because it was flashy or groundbreaking, but because it felt like a conversation, not a performance. One reviewer wrote, "This isn't music you listen to. It's music you live with." Another called it a balm for a noisy world. She read the reviews once, then tucked them away. Praise was nice, but it wasn't why she'd made the record. What mattered more were the small, unrecorded moments that followed. A letter arrived from a woman in another state, written in careful cursive on floral stationery. Her husband had passed away a year ago, and she'd played the album every night before bed. "It doesn't take the pain away," she wrote, "but it makes me feel less alone." A high school music teacher emailed to say her students had analyzed one of the original pieces in class. Not for technique, but for emotion. They asked, "How do you write something that feels like a hug?" And then there was the boy from the community center who showed up at her door one Saturday, with a composition of his own, scribbled on notebook paper. "I tried to make it sound like how you feel when it rains, but you're safe inside," he said, eyes wide with hope. She sat with him at the piano and helped him turn the scribbles into real notes. They played it together, slowly, laughing when they messed up. That, she thought, was the real legacy. Not streams or sales, but the quiet ripples of connection. At the grand veranda, things had settled into a new rhythm. She worked 3 nights a week, serving tables like she always had. The regulars still came, though fewer now treated her like a spectacle. Some still asked for her to play, and on Saturdays she did, but only if the mood felt right. Sometimes she'd play a Chopin prelude between dessert orders. Other times she'd just refill water and share a joke with the bartender. And that was enough. The restaurant still used her name in their promotions, but she'd drawn a line. No photos without permission, no fabricated backstories, no humble waitress turned star. Nonsense. To her surprise, the owner agreed. Business hadn't slowed. If anything, people seemed to respect the authenticity more. They came not just for the music, but for the feeling that here, in this elegant room, someone had refused to trade their truth for applause. Meanwhile, the community center had become her second home. What started as one weekly class had grown into a small program, funded by a modest grant she'd quietly applied for using her album Advance. Now, 2 afternoons a week, the room filled with kids of all ages, from shy 6-year-olds to teenagers saving up for their first keyboard. She didn't just teach scales and chords. She taught them to listen, to the music, to each other, to themselves. Mistakes aren't failures, she'd say. They're just part of the story. One afternoon, a girl who'd barely spoken for weeks played a short piece she'd written about her dog, who'd run away and come back 3 days later, muddy and triumphant. When she finished, the whole room clapped, not politely, but joyfully. The girl grinned so wide her eyes disappeared. That night, walking home under a sky full of early stars, she felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that hums beneath your ribs like a well-tuned note. The big label had offered to tour the album, of course. Small venues, intimate settings, nothing too flashy. She'd considered it, but in the end she said no. Not because she was afraid, but because she finally understood what she needed. Roots, not runways. She didn't want to spend months in hotels and airports, missing the rhythm of her real life. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of kids laughing in the hallway. The way the city felt different on a Tuesday versus a Saturday. Instead, she played where it mattered. A benefit for a shelter. A school assembly. A pop-up concert in a public park on a warm Sunday afternoon, where families spread blankets and babies clapped along offbeat. No tickets, no barriers, just music offered freely, and people came, not because she was famous, but because they trusted her honesty. One evening, as she wiped down tables after her shift, a man in a tailored coat approached. She recognized him. He'd been coming to the restaurant for years, Ollie.